Welcome back to Jays Talk Plus. I'm Blake Murphy, going to pivot off the Jays here. We'll talk about a former Jay, though, and RA Dickey. Let's talk about the Knuckleball. Chris Nowlin of Knuckleball Nation and the BMO Elite Athletics Knuckleball Academy in Torrance, California joins us now. I'm having a little trouble knuckleballing that sentence out of my mouth. But Chris, man, welcome. Thanks for doing this. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so for those who don't know, I know the MLB.com just did kind of a bigger feature on you and the academy, your relationship with Charlie Hough. But let's go through it a little bit for anyone who hasn't seen that or wants to relive it. What is your history with the knuckleball? How'd you end up throwing it in the first place?
Well, it's actually a pretty long story. I didn't play high school or college baseball. The last time I played baseball was Little League. But I grew up in Boston. I was thoroughly inspired by an experience at Fenway Park, watching Tim Wakefield take a no-hitter into the 8th inning when I was 12 years old. And so it came time to graduate college. I was thinking about law school. I had an apartment lined up with my buddies in Boston, and I had a girlfriend talking marriage already, and that seemed a little scary to me. So I decided to sell everything I owned on the front yard of my college house. I got about $500. I packed up my Jeep and I drove to Phoenix, Arizona, to become a professional knuckleball pitcher. And that was a pretty wild decision. A lot of people in my life didn't like it. And I got out to Phoenix, got a bartending job for the flexible schedule, started teaching myself how to pitch. And a year later, I ran into Charlie Hough and he took me under his wing.
That's really cool. And look, I didn't go pitch. I tried to get into media instead. But yeah, blow up the law school, blow up the marriage track, try something different in sports.
Yeah.
Right there with you, man. So you're teaching yourself the knuckleball. You hook up with Charlie Hough, and he trash talks your knuckleball first, and then helps you unlock it a little bit. And it gets good enough that you end up playing independent ball with that knuckleball. What kind of unlocked for you? What was that process like of figuring out how to throw it?
Well, so, I was obsessed with the knuckleball growing up. I was an all-season basketball player, but I wasn't not throwing. I would throw anybody who would have a catch of me. I was playing wiffle ball. I was at UMass. I would actually, my college, University of Massachusetts, I would sort of break into the baseball facility and throw knuckleballs almost every day into a sock net. I was sort of obsessed with it because once you throw a really good one, it's kind of a religious experience. You want to keep chasing it, but obviously it's elusive. So maybe you do 1 out of 10 in the beginning and then it grows and grows and grows. But what happened was I was just banking up all those, they say 10,000 hours. I was doing it just as a passion project on the side. And by the time I met Charlie Hough, I was killing the spin really, really well. It was just evident I never pitched before. My mechanics were all out of whack, and that's what he fixed with me. So when I first called him and came out to his house out in Orange County, California, RA Dickey was there. That's the first time I met him. So we learned it together side by side from Charlie Hough. And so mechanically it was very difficult. I had to do some different things than I was used to doing. Obviously I was a clean slate. I hadn't played since Little League. So but Charlie Hough was sort of was like a Mr. Miyagi type. He would just say, hey, he wouldn't even watch my pitch. I'd throw a great knuckleball, I'd hit the catcher and he wouldn't care. He would just say, your back foot's out of whack. You got to fix that. Go home. So I would drive home to Arizona, about 6 hours away, work on it for a week or two, and then I'd come back and he'd say, "Okay, now your front foot's garbage. Go fix that." I was impressing myself with how well I was throwing the knuckleball, but he didn't care. It was just, your foot's not in the right spot. You can't throw this well consistently. So go home. And then after about 4 or 5 months of that, he said, "Hey, I think you're finally ready." And I asked him for what, and he said, "Pro baseball." And he called up one of his buddies. He couldn't get me a job with the Dodgers because I had 0 track record, so we had to go the independent route.
That's pretty cool, man. That's basically self-taught, having not played at all, and you make it to indie ball. It's a great story. And I'd imagine it's very cool that you were side by side there learning with R.A. Dickey, who of course had the edge of, hey, mechanically he had pitched, he had no UCLs, but still could get it going. How cool was that aspect of it to you're doing this, and obviously it's very, very cool for you, and you make it to independent ball, and then you're looking over and one of your classmates under Charlie Hough is getting it done for the Mets and then the Blue Jays at the major league level?
Well, it was a slow process. He was he was very upset about the whole thing in the very beginning. That's my read of it. I didn't know him. Obviously, he had big league time, and as as a guy who hadn't played baseball, I didn't realize there was sort of a baseball hierarchy, and I wasn't really supposed to be fraternizing with a big leaguer. So, that first day I walked up to him. I just so happened to see him pitch on ESPN. He was one of those 4A guys. So he was coming up and down in the big leagues, but he outpitched Tim Wakefield. I was always watching Tim Wakefield games. He outpitched him, beat him 1-0, and he was throwing something called the thing. So he was throwing this really hard knuckleball. He was gripping it like a knuckleball, and he was throwing it really hard. And then the Rangers said, "Hey, that's your future." And the only template that they had to go off at the time was Wakefield. So they were telling Dickey to throw slow, which just doesn't suit him. He looked really, really uncomfortable, and he was pretty upset about it. So when Hough would go to the bathroom, Dickey would just start throwing his conventional stuff in the bullpen and start pumping 95 at this kid, and then Hough would come back and he'd go back to RA had such a powerful arm. He was just stepping 1 or 2 feet and throwing at 65. It looked like he didn't care, wasn't trying. And then obviously the Rangers brought him up. He was on the opening day roster, and I think he gave up, a record amount of home runs during his first start because he just doesn't. He's not capable of throwing slow. I don't think that just didn't suit his personality.
Yeah, and then obviously eventually figured it out. Had a nice career with a couple of good years here in Toronto. So from this, you decide to start the Knuckleball Nation Academy, and you're selling a training video at first, then you do a small clinic, then you're doing clinics all over. How has that process been? Like you seems like you kind of found this passion for the knuckleball and you're now passing it on, but also ideally we're going to start seeing some more knuckleballers, at least in the college and minor league levels. How has the process generally been of turning this passion project of yours into something you're passing on to other pro players, sure, but also the youth?
Yeah, so I mean, Knuckleball Nation was sort of born out of necessity. It wasn't. I couldn't say it was a passion project in the beginning because my passion was trying to get myself to the big leagues. So I was living in Vegas, and I just needed sort of a side hustle in between, because indie ball pays $1,500 American dollars a month. It's not very lavish lifestyle. So the off season, you got to figure out how to make money, and I was building websites for people at the time, and so I decided, all right, I'm gonna slap up this rudimentary site and sell an instructional video. I was actually mailing DVDs out at the time. That's how many years ago it was. And then I put the word out for a clinic, and 15 people showed up from all over the world in Vegas. And I decided, okay, this might be a way to make some cash on the side. And then, of course, with my professional experience, I got to work with Phil Niekro really closely before his passing. And so I got Phil involved, and we would do a clinic every year in Atlanta where we'd have people flying in as far away as from Korea, Japan, professional players from Asia. And then, Charlie started doing clinics with me. I do a clinic every year in Las Vegas. And then it started really branching out, and we started getting, I started doing clinics in New York, Boston, Seattle, Portland, Oregon. And then we went overseas. We did some clinics in Taiwan and in Japan. And in fact, I was scheduled to go do a clinic with Stephen Wright, the former Red Sox All-Star, in Taiwan on March 20th, 2020. And that's, the world shut down a couple weeks before then. So, but that, the clinic thing was really, really growing. And then, the pandemic really set it back and sort of reset the whole organic growth of that. So now, I have a 2-year-old running around. I don't play professionally anymore. So now this is my focus, is passing on all this information. And really, I'm in a very unique spot because I think the world's leading knuckleball expert, not named Hough or Dickey. So I've worked with Hough and Niekro extensively. Obviously, I learned alongside RA Dickey. He's been a knuckleball acquaintance of mine, I guess you'd call a friend for a long time. And, I did some clinics with him in Nashville for his favorite charities. So yeah, it's been growing and trying to connect the younger generation to all this information, because really we'll find the next great knuckleballer. He just needs to know how to do it. And that brings us to Alex Blandino, who I think will be the next great one.
So Alex Blandino, for anyone who doesn't know, was a position player in the Reds organization. He got to, cup of coffee here, cup of coffee there, but he's now trying to reinvent himself as a knuckleball pitcher in the Cincinnati Reds organization. He's pitching in the complex league right now. Only a small sample there, but I know you've worked with him. What has that looked like for Blandino? How's his progress coming with the knuckler?
Well, so I found him by accident. He was sort of a lot of this knuckleball stuff for me. I went and chased it. It seems like serendipity. I ran into Charlie Hough by accident as well. I actually ran into Stephen Wright by accident. We walked into the same gym together in Tennessee one day. That's how I met him. It wasn't through connections or anything. We just happened to be in the same place at the same time. But and Stephen was kind enough to do some clinics with me as well out in Nashville. But anyways, Blandino was working out at the facility that I sort of partnered with here, Bima Elite Athletics, and he was sort of wayward. He was listless because he hadn't been offered his usual professional baseball job he was used to, because he was a first-round draft pick, spent 3 years in the big leagues with the Reds, bounced around with I believe the Giants and the Mariners in the minor leagues, and what he tells me is he said they told him he couldn't hit anymore, so he was in the facility and he was throwing a bucket of balls into a target. I walked over there. He happened to be throwing knuckleballs, and I've seen hundreds, maybe thousands of knuckleballers across the country and the world, and Alex was by far the best I'd ever seen, besides my own, of course. So, so I just said, hey, it was apparent that he was like me in the beginning when Huff found me. He just didn't know mechanically what he was doing, so I said, you should really try to do this. And then he started calling me, and we were throwing 2-3 times a week for the last, maybe 8 months or so. Really worked on hammering his mechanics, especially the stuff that Huff would see, because the ultimate goal was to bring him to Charlie to get sort of his blessing. We worked for months before we brought Charlie in. And I sort of hyped Charlie up as this, Charlie Huff is one of the nicest, kindest human beings on earth. But when it comes to the knuckleball, he's, put it kindly, he's extremely honest. So, because all he's been around is big league pitching, 25 years in the big, 6 years as a big league pitching coach. And if it's not good, he lets you know. And so I just wanted Alex to be ready for that moment, because, I've been in the facility when he's ended guys' careers. So I didn't want that to happen to to Alex. So Alex ended up impressing him, and then he decided, he was going to chase it. And obviously, as a first-round draft pick and a former big leaguer, he has many more connections than I did when I started. So he just called up the Reds, explained what was going on, and they said, all right, come on over. So I was actually supposed to be out in Arizona helping them coach him, but he just got promoted today. So he went to he's in A-ball now in Daytona Beach.
Nice. Well, it sucks for your trip, but good for him that he's, I know from what I could read, most of his pitching has taken place outside of like official games. He's only got the 2 official appearances in the complex league, so not a lot to go on from here. From his, we don't have video of complex league games, and we don't have stats from the intra squad games or whatever else. So this doesn't have to be specific to Alex, but in general, what makes a good knuckleball? Like when you're doing it yourself, when you're trying to teach someone, what are we looking at? Now, this is mostly a radio and podcast show, but there is a video component. Some people are watching on TV. Yeah. So if you have a ball in your hand, you can show us. But what are we trying to do with a knuckleball to get that, like to deaden that spin so it doesn't have that spin rate?
So here's a big league baseball right here. So most people, what they're going to do is find the Rawlings right here. You're going to have some sort of logo, whether it's Wilson or Rawlings or whatever it is. The vast majority of guys who've had success put two fingernails right across that logo, sort of curl their other fingers around. Doesn't really matter what you do with your pinky here. Trying to line this up with the camera.
No, you're good.
Doesn't matter what you do with the pinky. And all you're going to do is, when it comes time to throw, your fingernails need to be north of the equator of the ball, and they sort of push the ball out. Now it's a little tricky because your fingers shouldn't be super active, but they're not exactly passive, and that's where the feel comes in. They're sort of balanced on there. Those fingers absorb the weight of the ball like shock absorbers. At a certain weight, you just kind of let it go, and then it looks like guys push through the ball, but that's just their hand naturally getting to the end range of motion. and the ball sort of pops out of your hand like a seed. Now, it's really important, when you're watching the knuckleball on TV, it's the spin that you need on the ball in order for the ball to be violent, move around like you would think a knuckleball moves. It flutters around and drops. In the 60-mile-an-hour range, it has to be under one rotation. When you get up into the 70s, you're looking at about a spin and a half. And then when you get up to Dickey's velocity, the margin of error really widens, and then you're looking at maybe 3 or 4 rotations up there. So, it's sort of like this very steep curve as far as the spin requirements to make the ball flutter. But it's also very important that the ball is, any rotation on the ball is going forward, the bite into the wind to create that turbulence that makes the knuckleball move. If the ball spins backwards, those are gopher balls. That's why knuckleballers give up a lot of home runs, because that ball that spins backwards, even if it's not spinning a whole lot, is going to stay up, because it's trying to break up, but gravity is pulling it down at the same time. Makes it the flattest pitch in the game.
So that feel, that pushing it off the fingers, that's the hardest part. That's why nobody throws a knuckleball other than like Matt Waldron in the major leagues. It's just, I mean, I guess there's a component too of like teams don't have guys invest in trying to learn the knuckleball until you get to a situation like Blandino where, hey, other stuff, or Dickey where other stuff hasn't worked. But that feel element as you release the ball to try to deaden the spin, that's the most difficult part.
Yeah, and Huff would always tell me I can bring you all the way up to that point, and then I can't tell you how it feels. I try to do my best in saying that my fingers are like shock absorbers. They're holding back the weight of the ball. The ball is squishing back into my fingertips, and at a certain weight, I just let it go. That's the best way I can explain it. Yeah, that's definitely the most difficult part, because the difference between a good knuckleball and a bad knuckleball is just a millimeter or two. So your release point has to be extremely consistent, and then what you really have to do is nail down every motion in the delivery from the ground up. The knuckleball really lives between your kneecaps and your rib cage, and all of that movement down below needs to happen sort of perfectly in sync. So you have to learn very sort of you have to drill down on the minutia of the mechanics much more than you would if you just take the ball and throw 100 miles an hour. It doesn't really, it doesn't really matter what your body's doing as long as you can get it over the plate.
Well, that's it's fascinating, man. It was great to see the MLB.com feature on you guys. It's going to be cool to see Alex Blandino in single A now. Thanks so much for doing this, man. I really appreciate it. It's been fascinating to learn about.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
It's Chris Nowlin of Knuckleball Nation. Again, the facility, BMO Elite Athletics down in Torrance, California, where he does the Knuckleball Academy out of with Charlie Hough. Very cool. Yeah, man, you get to work with Tim Wakefield, RA Dickey, Phil Niekro. That's really cool. And then, yeah, Alex Blandino, that player that we talked about, is in the Cincinnati Reds system. David Fletcher would be the other one. He's a former position player who's been trying to teach himself the knuckleball in the minor leagues as well. He is also being investigated in the Shohei adjacent gambling situation as well, though. So maybe his story not as feel good a story as it might be for Alex Blandino. Jays lost last night. Tough spot in the standings today, heading into a really tough 6-game road trip, 3 against Cleveland and then 3 against Boston, both on the road. The Jays are 35-39. They're 15 games back in the division, which has been gone for a long time. They're also 5.5 back in the wild card now. They're back down to tied with Tampa, which is a team that you thought you would have avoided. So if you look at the playoff picture, yeah, the first wild card is gone. Probably they're 13.5 back of the Orioles. But you look at how that sets up beyond that. The Twins, Royals, and Red Sox are only separated by a game and a half. So if you look at who the Jays would have to jump to get there, this missed opportunity of getting swept by the Red Sox is a big one, because no, the Red Sox aren't in one of those spots, but they're a team you'd have to jump on the way, and giving up 3 games to them is really, really unfortunate and difficult. The Jays will have to try to get that sweep back like they did last year. Much different energy and excitement around that series last year than I think there will be this time. But we'll see how it goes. They'll face the Guardians first. We'll set that series up for you tomorrow, but it's currently slated to be TBA against Carlos Carrasco. We're all anticipating that'll be Ariel Rodriguez. John Schneider more or less said as much yesterday, barring anything changing. It would be Jose Barrios against Ben Lively on Saturday and Yusei Kikuchi against Tristan McKenzie on Sunday. So could be a fun series if it goes a certain way. The Jays took 2 of 3 against the Guardians last time out. We'll see. We'll set it all up for you tomorrow. Thanks to Ben Nicholson-Smith, to Matthew Ritchie, to Eno Saris, to Chris Nowlin for coming on. Thanks, as always, to Lance Kennedy, Amit Maan, and Jennifer Rolnick behind the glass. Hope you all have a wonderful Thursday off. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
That's a DQ chicken strip basket. Oh, look at those tasty DQ chicken strips.